Hi, I'm Joyce from London Tend, and I'm here in the gorgeous Beckenham Park, and I'm about to go and meet the amazing garden designer Kathryn Cox, and I'm going to talk about her design process and garden sharing with London Tend. Come with me. Yeah, so tell me, what is the difference between being a garden designer and say like a landscape gardener?
Okay, so with a garden designer, very much what's happening is you're going into the space for the first time with the client, and what you're doing is you're imagining what it could be. So you're sometimes we get a blank canvas, maybe they've bought a new home, they haven't done the garden yet, or they've done renovations, or it could be really, really overgrown, and we need to kind of imagine how that will be and strip it back and start again. So there's a whole kind of concept process that you have really before you put anything on paper.
Right, okay. And then, a landscape designer, a landscape gardener, would you then give that sort of plan to them to then sort of realise your ideas, or would they have some sort of element of joining the dots and kind of you're the ideas person and they're like the how person? Is that kind of how it might work?
Well, ideally you work together as a team, the designer and landscaper. So the designer will come up with the master plan, but also should have all the dimensions, everything that the landscaper needs to actually build the garden.
Yeah.
And ideally you can actually hand the project over to them, and then they become the lead on the actual garden to bring it to life.
Right.
But actually what's a really great, if you have the opportunity, is to actually get a landscaper, if you've got a really good relationship, is bring them in early, because then you can actually develop the ideas. You might be thinking of something, they can give their input, because landscapers have a wealth of information and knowledge and build experience. And really, I believe in the power of collaboration.
So in respect of lenders and tenders and that relationship, is there any advice you could share with how that relationship translates?
Yes, well, I think that when you probably go into a garden for the first time, like you would with London Tend, maybe a great idea is actually to think about the overarching narrative of the garden. What are you trying to achieve? So you're looking at the garden and its aspect. Where is the sun hitting? Where is the sun in the shade? Is it facing north? Is it facing south? What plants are thriving? What plants are struggling? And actually probably what's in the garden, like as soon as you go there, will give you a really idea of what works and what is growing and what isn't growing. But if you really want to take it to another level, you can actually think about the overarching narrative of the garden. You know, are you thinking maybe this could be a Mediterranean space? Could it be a cottage style garden? Could it be a naturalistic garden? Is it about bringing the inside outside and creating outdoor rooms? So, you know, there's lots of different ways. Or is it an edible garden? Does someone want it to be like allotments? So maybe talk to the person who is actually your garden, you're lending and tending. See what, because essentially in garden design terms, they are the client.
Yeah.
See what they feel that they would want for their garden, and actually kind of bring in your own ideas. And maybe you have, through that, like again, the power of collaboration, you could actually make something and create something that is really special for them and also really special for you.
And that's a really great idea actually, with treating your garden lender as the client, because I always sort of say that there's a sort of mutuality there and it kind of has to work both ways. But yeah, I think putting it in that frame of mind helps you kind of maybe set mutual boundaries, but sort of very clear boundaries at the same time, which I think is important. Now, I think your designs are stunning, and you do a lot of garden design, which I think brings a lot of the indoors out, and a lot of your garden spaces are really sort of lovely, relaxing, but beautiful sort of social spaces. Is there anything that you could suggest to lenders and tenders that they could do to help foster that sort of social aspect of sharing the garden?
Yes, well, I think that first of all, what I usually do is look where the hero sunspot is.
Ooh.
And also look at the garden at different times of the day. So when you first go to a garden, you might go in the morning, but actually the garden, the best time might be 3, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night when the sun is setting. So find out how to use the garden. Is it that you're going to have coffee in the morning? Is it that, you know, you want to make a kind of communal space for everyone to enjoy after work? So find out, you know, what you want to use the garden for, where the light is hitting, where is that sunset, and then ideas will kind of spring around there. And I'm very much about, you know, everyone likes to have a glass of wine after work. And, you know, you want to have fun in these gardens, you know, and you want your friends to come over and be like, you know, this is amazing. I always want to feel like I'm on holidays in the garden.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and holidays can be really different for lots of different people. It can be you're feeling like you're on the beach. Or it can be like you're in the woodland. It can be like, you know, like you're in a cottage English countryside. So it's kind of very much thinking about being on holidays at home.
Oh, that is such an inspiring and beautiful visualization for your garden, because in England, well, in the UK, where we have predominantly very dim and wet weather, it's nice to kind of look out and think, this is a relaxing and enjoyable space all throughout the year, thinking about where those sunspots are. Hero sunspots, that's a great turn of phrase. I'm going to think of that every time now I look at my garden. So yeah, that's a really great idea. Follow the sun. Tell me about the themes of your garden at the RHS show.
So at Hampton Court Palace, I was one of 7 borders, and I did a border called the Flower Power Field, and it was a tribute to Woodstock Festival, the home of flower power. So I was asked to do a theme of flower power, and I kind of thought, okay, flower power, hippie movement, I love Woodstock, how can I bring that to life? So what I did is I made an imaginary place to chill out between bands if you were at the Woodstock Festival. So it had a teepee at one end, it had like a little rug in the front, and then it had this kind of field that was filled with asters, and it was kind of almost like how I would like to be if I was at Woodstock.
Yeah.
But then also it had like little signs that was like flower power, peace and love, and they were created by an artist, Catamondo, London. And actually the garden was also, I received a grant from the RHS and London College Garden Design for all the plants as well. And it was amazing to be part of it.
It was really, really just stunning, and all of those colours bouncing around, just you could tell it made people really happy, made them really chilled out. I mean, I can imagine those garden shows get pretty raucous sometimes, so that chill out area is perfect.
Yeah.
And you know, having those beautiful bright sort of rainbow kaleidoscopic colours would be so good in gardens in the UK, you know, on dim days with low light in most of the year. It would just be so sort of joyous to see those lovely bright colours popping up. Daisies, are they a perennial?
Yes, they're all perennials. I did have grasses in there, ornamental grasses as well. But actually, just picking up what you said, in terms of the planting design, because I'm actually a planting designer as well, the way I actually did it in the design in the form of a kaleidoscope.
Oh!
So I actually had an image of a kaleidoscope underneath my design, and then I followed the design with all the different plants to kind of get that kaleidoscopic effect with all the different colors. So I had purples, I had yellows, I had pinks, but then the grasses peppered through there gave that illusion of it feeling like you're in a field, like you would be at a music festival.
That is so clever. That's why you are an award-winning garden designer.
Thank you.
Wow, what a cool way to sort of plan things.
And I think the public reaction was amazing, the visitor reaction, because you know, I think the signs brought a lot to it, but also, and it was built by Acacia Gardens, it was raised off the ground. So actually everything was at your eye level rather than sunken down. And people were taking loads of photos of themselves in front of the signs. And yeah, it became like an Instagram hit, which was amazing.
I noticed my feed was just flooded in it. And I guess thinking about sort of dynamic planting, using those lovely long strappy ornamental grasses, you're kind of giving a really dynamic vibe to the garden and giving it that really organic feel. And how would you go about sort of doing that and giving a more sort of instant gratifying garden makeover, for want of a better word, in a shared garden?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is that naturalistic feel of the garden.
Yeah.
And I think you can really achieve that by not having too many different types of plants.
Okay.
I actually had a very small amount of plants. I think I had like 5 or 6 perennials, and that was it. And I just repeated them over and over throughout the actual garden themselves. And that's how you get the design-led feel. But also, don't always feel like you have to have the tall plants at the back and the short ones at the front. Have the tall ones at the front. Pepper them in as well. So mix it all up together and kind of just have fun with it.
Yeah.
And that's how you'll get that naturalistic feeling. There is a method to the madness.
Yes, yeah.
I had one visitor say your garden is bonkers, but I think that's how it wasn't structured. So you had yellow in the middle, yellow at the front, you had the tall in the front, tall in the middle. So just mix it up. Don't try to follow old-fashioned rules.
Yeah, so plan the chaos in a way.
Yeah, exactly, and just have fun with it. Don't feel like feels like with a lot of programs as well. There's a lot of rules in terms of planting, but actually, if you have fun with it and just follow your instinct, you can actually have a really great effect.
Oh, I love the way this verbena, is it? Verbena.
Yeah.
I love the way it kind of spills over the pavement. That looks really lovely and natural.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a really good example of not having all the tall plants at the back, but having them at the front. You know, and also it's tactile. You know, you can touch them. You know, they're not kind of, and they're just all mixed up to give that really naturalistic feel.
That's lovely because you've got these kind of like, are they kind of geranium plant?
Yeah, geranium roseanne.
Is this a salvia of some kind? Whoopsie.
It's beautiful,
Lovely.
isn't it?
It's so pretty. And here's this kind of ornamental grass that you used.
Absolutely. And also having it at the front of the border and not the back, so you can actually run your hands through it as you're walking.
So nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you've got these beautiful asters here, and all these are these also perennials as well?
Grasses will come back every year.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you usually cut them at the end of March.
Yeah.
And then they'll have a little period where they need to grow back, and then here we are now in September and they're full.
And it just looks so lovely at the sort of end of the season.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess it would just continue to just keep.
Yeah, and they can be all the way
Developing.
through the winter months because actually having the stems are really ornamental all the way through the winter, so you don't really need to cut back until the end of next March.
And I see what you mean about the tactility. I just love touching them. Yeah, it's kind of rough and smooth. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Thinking about daisies and them being perennials, can you think of any other plants that may come back year after year, or perhaps share some of your eco-friendly and sustainable practices that you bring to garden design and what you could share with lenders and tenders?
So the first thing I look at when I go to a new garden in terms of sustainability and biodiversity is what can I keep? You know, I don't go into a garden and like to rip it all out. I look at all the plants that are already there, because actually under the undergrowth there might be some amazing plants, there might be some beautiful old shrubs. You know, we've found really old roses. And actually go in there, and actually what happens then is that you get a lovely mature garden which you can add to it. Because if you rip everything out and start anew, you know, first of all, that's very expensive, but also it might have that new feeling. So it's very much about trying to retain as much planting as possible and adding to it, bearing in mind what your theme might be.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, because obviously you sort of see a garden sometimes as a blank canvas, but I guess you also have to incorporate what's there. Hello. Little doggy. And are there any other kind of juicy tips that you can share with garden sharers?
I think with garden sharers, first of all, actually make a log of what you have in the garden. I'm a bit of a nerd at heart, and I have an Excel spreadsheet, and I take photos. I take photos of all the individual plants that I want to keep in the garden. I measure them so I know, you know, their sizes, or I make notes that they might need to be pruned a little bit, but really get to know that garden and write things down and have photo records that you can keep going back to, because I guess with Lend and Tend, I don't know if do they go every week?
Well, this is the great thing really, because garden tenders and garden lenders would create their own sort of garden sharing agreements, and you might have somebody that's very enthusiastic that can go every day. Some people maybe go every week. I mean, I'd say you shouldn't leave it for too long, because you just blink and there are weeds growing everywhere. But you know, one would hope that you would visit at least once a week in the good seasons. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's great to have these photo records, because when you're not at the garden and you might have some spare time, you can actually look over your notes and things, and because very much your ideas might come when you're walking down the street, or you know, just maybe when you're in your own garden, or however it works. But yeah, just take lots of photos and notes and think about maybe what you want to do next. Oh, planning, yeah, that's great. And sort of living with your mind in your garden even when you're not there. And also that kind of plan is something that you could potentially share with your garden lender to kind of demonstrate your ideas and your vision as well, to kind of keep that relationship buoyant as well. So that's a really great tip. How would you think about overcoming challenges in a maybe small or difficult garden space?
Well, it's interesting with a small garden, the actual light conditions can change within a 30 centimetre diameter. So it's very much about looking at where the sunspots are, looking at how the light travels, how does the garden work at different times of the day, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and in the afternoon, because every little bit counts in a small garden.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes small gardens can be the hardest to design for me, because we really need to work the space hard, and all the dimensions need to, of course, need to be 100% accurate. But plants, you know, you could have like a fern that sits happily, and then 20 centimeters away, it's full sun.
Right.
So, you know, it's very much about getting to know the space in detail, but it's always very much, and then also monitoring it as it grows. Making sure that you have not just the right plant in the right place, but the right place, like for the plant as it grows and gets bigger.
Right.
So when you're looking at plants, and you might be putting new plants into the garden, really understand what is their eventual size. I mean, with a lot of plants, it'll take a long time for them to grow, but some grow really quickly.
Yeah.
So you don't want to put something in and then maybe you have like a month off or something, or 2 months off, and then it's like, you know, so really think about what the eventual size of a plant will be as well.
That is a really good tip. So thinking about your beautiful flower power inspired garden and your use of daisies, the daisy is a very emblematic flower of nostalgia from the 90s, and before that the 60s, and we're seeing a lot of that in fashion again. Are there any other trends or fashions that you see on the horizon on the way in garden design?
Well, I'm not sure about on the horizon, but I know there is definitely a movement towards naturalistic gardens. I think people want to feel, I have people saying they want to feel enclosed in nature, you know, and this is very much like a lot of my clients, much younger than you'd expect as well. You know, they might be in their 20s or 30s. You know, I think a lot of the time people who engage a garden designer, you think they were our parents' age or even older. But actually, I've seen a massive shift to young people. And I don't think it's just the pandemic. I think it started with the house plants as well. And I think now it's kind of veering to outside. So I think the main trends would be is to have that naturalistic garden where you feel enclosed in nature, but also younger people as well. And actually, they're investing in their gardens, and also a big shift to aftercare. So making sure that gardens, and this probably relates back to Lendon 10, making sure that gardens are properly looked after throughout their life cycle. So it's not just about going in and creating a beautiful garden like we're on a TV show, but actually then also looking at the aftercare and making sure with our clients, whatever age they are, that the garden suits their needs in terms of their skill level, because some of them are gardeners and want to look after it themselves. But if they're not, making sure that they've got the support in terms of aftercare, so someone is looking after their garden for them.
That's really interesting actually, because I think the concept of like doing up the garden can often sort of result in like a makeover effect, which can be very sort of throwaway and not very sort of sustaining through years and seasons. So that's a really great bit of advice actually, and makes me think of when I was doing a bit of just landscaping and gardening work myself years ago, that clients would often say to me, oh, I just want to change it and make it over, but then it would be something that they'd want that year or that month, and then maybe years later they'd want to completely change it. So it's a really great concept to think of a garden, funnily enough, growing with you and growing into the future.
And also this comes back to like the retained plants idea, going into a garden and really seeing if there's mature retained plants that you can retain. Because also thinking about the wildlife is really important, because you know you might have a really lovely hedge in the back of the garden that, you know, families of birds have been like, you know, nesting in for years. So very much about like when you go into a garden, as with Lendon 10, maybe also look at the wildlife. How is the wildlife using the garden? Are there birds? You know, how can you sustain that wildlife, because it's their home?
Yes, we are sharing their space, aren't we? They're not sharing ours. That's something that's always really important to remember.
Actually, the more overgrown it is, probably the more wildlife there is. So it's something to be really mindful of when you're going in, as with Lendon 10, and actually just kind of getting to know not just the garden but the wildlife that inhabit it.
Yeah, that's a very, very important tip. And is there anything that you think would be a good way of going in and clearing a garden to be mindful of that sort of biodiversity that's there and all of the wildlife that might be there?
Yeah, I think the best way is to go in and actually look at the plants that are there, log them, make sure you know them really well, and then so you're not accidentally ripping something up that you want to keep.
Yeah.
But also I think in terms of biodiversity and sustainability, it's really important to bring water into the garden.
Yeah.
So it could be as simple as having kind of like a massive bowl that you've got, or you know, or an old plant pot that you put resin in the bottom so you can actually put water in.
Yeah.
Because all of that can actually just add to the garden and also the atmosphere of the garden, and also help the wildlife that may already be in there.
That's lovely. Lovely atmospheric shared gardens full of wildlife, beautiful social indoor outdoor spaces.
Yeah.
Kathryn, thank you so much for sharing all of your insight and spending some time with me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you want to learn more about Kathryn's designs, visit kathryncoxgardendesign.co.uk and follow on Instagram.
It's kathryncox.studio.
And catch you again on another one of these videos. Thank you for watching.
Thanks guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow, look at that house. Who ordered